Welcome to Journey Without Goal. And first of all, I just want to check that the sound is okay. Good morning. Yes, okay, I'm glad. Yeah. So we're presently studying Journey Without Goal. And the reason for doing this is that it's important to understand Vajrayana. Vajrayana is essential to Buddhism. And we're blessed with actually having a living Vajrayana tradition down until the present day. We have an uninterrupted, you could say, transmission, continuity of the Vajrayana tradition. The Vajrayana is very often misunderstood. The culture of Vajrayana very often lends itself to some misinterpretations. So it's really important to be clear how the Vajrayana teaching fits in with the logic of the Buddhist teaching in general. And also really as persons that are brought up in a modern context where very often we're constructed as really being nothing more than just mechanistic phenomena, and the scope of our existence being nothing really more than a sort of random occurrence, then it's quite valuable to draw into question some of the assumptions that are basic to this, which is of course what the Buddhist teaching does in general, with its understanding of the role really of the mind, and also particularly the role of the unconfused mind. And this is really essential for us in understanding reality. So of course, the entire Buddhist vehicle operates then with clarifying this consciousness. What's particular about the Vajrayana is that it, right from the start, or you could say right from the main part of the Vajrayana teaching, takes into consideration the abiding qualities of the unconfused innate disposition that we sometimes refer to as Buddha nature. That is the scope of the Vajrayana. So you really have two approaches to the Buddhist journey. One is a gradual approach where we operate with causes and conditions, and gradually we achieve the goal. And that, of course, applies also in the context of the Vajrayana, but the Vajrayana also brings into perspective that the goal, of course, is already there. We are undertaking a journey, and when we say journey without goal, it's not exactly that we're not going anywhere as such, but it's more that where we're going and the journey is one, and also we could say the journey is about what's already present. So in that sense also, there's not really the same perspective in regards to, you could say, ambition. There's very much an acknowledgement of what is already there. So the Vajrayana is sometimes referred to as the resultant vehicle, in that it acknowledges and really has a vision right from the start of the already existing qualities that are innate. So it is very much the universal Buddhist project of removing confusion and uncovering the disposition of enlightenment. But rather than defining ourselves in terms of being confused individuals, then in the Vajrayana we define ourselves very much in terms of our already existing inheritance or wealth, or what we sometimes refer to as the element or the Buddha nature. So that's the angle that the Vajrayana takes. The specific way then into the Vajrayana is very much premised on the interaction with the living tradition, and particularly with a living teacher. There's certainly, particularly in the modern context, a lot of it makes a lot of sense to be very discerning about engaging with a teacher. And this also, of course, has applied in traditional contexts as well. But in the traditional context, there's already a lot of, you could say, existing know-how within the you could say, the cultural application of the path. And so within traditional context, there's already, you could say, a lot of folk wisdom around with regards to approaching the process of the teacher. And of course, also a lot of instructions. In the modern context, then it makes sense to spend a lot of time really being discerning about the teacher. But that said, it's also very reassuring that what we're engaging in is a living project. It's not just a theoretical project. And what, particularly, of course, in the Buddhist context, what we are about is experience. It's something felt. It's not just about intellectual information. And so in the Buddhist teaching, and particularly then the Vajrayana, we particularly rely on this inspiration, or what we call blessing, from living a teacher and lineage. So as we begin then our study here today, we'll continue with the section that is to a beautiful liturgy by Jamgon Kongtrul Lodrutai, which is called Crying to the Gurus from Afar, Intensifying Devotion in One's Heart. And this is a liturgy that invokes enlightenment through devotion to the teachers. Of course, in the Buddhist tradition, which is not theistic, then there's a lot of emphasis on the practice of devotion and the relationship to the teacher really as essential for gauging and being sensitized to and realizing this quality, this indescribable, intangible, ineffable quality that's innate to us through the interaction with the teacher. And so hence particularly in the Vajrayana tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on the teacher really as what embodies enlightenment, where the teacher not so much is seen as a savior, but rather as someone who mirrors really this quality that's innate to us. And yet, because of our confusion and because variety of conditions that we call obscurations, then it's difficult for us to immediately perceive this. And so, of course, the Buddhist journey, and also what we call the practice of nundra and so forth, creates really the condition for recognizing this nature, but specifically then the interaction with and the openness to and being sensitive to the teacher's presence is what enables us to have some direct insight to the nature of this quality of what we call the sort of wisdom, this unobscured quality. On your left-hand side, you have His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche, who was a very great master in Tibetan Buddhism, head of the Nyingma tradition, and also one of the teachers of Trungpa Rinpoche. Close students who tell me that in the last years of Trungpa Rinpoche's life, he would actually very often go and see His Holiness Dudjom Rinpoche and take counsel from Dudjom Rinpoche. Yes. So as I mentioned last time, we're going to be taking questions at the end. Please feel free at any point to write in questions, but I'll wait a while before I'll be taking them. Okay, so this liturgy, I'm not going to go through all of it, like I also mentioned last time. I'm just going to go through and so we'll be continuing the actual teaching from Trungpa Rinpoche, but we'll also go over the liturgy bit by bit every time. So in invoking the teacher, we're now invoking the lineage. And in Tibetan Buddhism and in the Buddhist teaching in general, we invoke lineage as persons who have undergone the journey, and as such represents an example for us. We might think of them as being situated in a different cultural context, but really we see them as having undergone a process that is universal. And so the teachers that we that we invoke and that we think of, they're not merely sort of magical beings that existed in days gone by who undertook extraordinary esoteric things that really belong to a different era, that are sort of, so they're like things of pre-modernity, almost prehistory. And of course, you do find a fair amount of, how do you say, disregard for what we in the modern world regard as historicity. There is certainly some degree of historicity with all the teachers, but at the same time, they're not so much seen really as situated within time and space, as more representing really, again, this Buddha nature. And so even though even our present teacher, we don't entirely see our present teacher as just being a physical metaphysician, somebody who was born in that year and who presently is residing here and there, etc., but more see the teacher's universal role in terms of our disposition, our nature. And as such, also when we invoke the lineage, we're invoking the lineage really in terms of the universal quality that already abides within us. So that said, here we're invoking Guru Amitabha. The text reads, Guru Amitabha, think of me. Look upon me from the realm of Dharmakaya, simplicity. Lead us of evil karma who wander in samsara to the pure land of great bliss. So we invoke the Buddha Amitabha, of course, as somebody who abides as the teacher in the realm known as Sukhavati, which is regarded as a manifest Buddha realm. But at the same time, also the Buddha Amitabha, Guru Amitabha here, is also seen as embodying the ultimate nature of reality, awakening, Dharmakaya. When we say simplicity here, the Tibetan is Chögyam, Nisprapancha, which actually means free from any conceptual constructs. And that is the very nature of awakening. It's not something that has anything to do with the dualistic constructions of the ordinary mind. It is the wisdom that's free from any duality, any subject-object, and any involvement in the notions of objectifying phenomena. And so the Dharmakaya is the very ground of awakening. So we refer to this as the Dharmakaya. This is then the embodied in Amitabha. Also, we embody the qualities of enlightenment. We don't just think of them purely as philosophical phenomena, abstract phenomena, but very much as living experience. And hence, all the various qualities, and particularly then in the Vajrayana, all the various qualities of enlightenment are seen in terms of Buddhas and seen in terms of embodiment. So we supplicate the Buddha Amitabha, and again, not as someone external, but as someone who abides ultimately within ourselves. Of course, we can think of Amitabha in terms of someone external, but really where Amitabha abides is within our own nature. And that within that nature, then, we have the power of Amitabha resides within ourselves, the sanity that abides within ourselves. We then invoke and supplicate that that the Buddha Amitabha may lead us out of confusion, us who engage in confused actions that lead us into suffering. Evil karma that takes us wandering in the cycle of confusion and suffering, samsara. Guru Avalokiteshvara, think of me, look upon me from the realm of Sambhogakaya, luminosity. Pacify completely the sufferings of the 6 realms, shake us from the very depth of the 3 realms of samsara. And then we invoke enlightenment's manifestation, which in this case then is Avalokiteshvara, who embodies the manifest quality of enlightenment, which is luminosity, the cognizant quality. And that quality of enlightenment is, of course, infinite in all its various aspects: strength, wisdom, compassion, etc. Primarily, then, we would say of all the qualities, then the main quality of enlightenment is this compassion, this warmth that extends. And so we refer to Avalokiteshvara as the manifestation of enlightenment, and we again supplicate that all the sufferings that are happening within the 6 realms, all the confused projections of the confused mind, that this may be pacified. And we supplicate Avalokiteshvara to shake us from the depth. Nothing should be left sort of untouched in terms of our confusion. So we are not just saying, remove some confusion, but really get to the bottom of it, churning or shaking the depths. Then the manifestation within the realm, then, because we could say the Sambhogakaya is subtle. It's the subtle, intangible qualities of enlightenment, yet manifesting within the scope of this world, we then think of the Nyamanakaya Buddha. And in this case, then, this is Guru Padmasambhava. And we think of Guru Padmasambhava as the quintessential embodiment of enlightenment that plays within this world. And Padmasambhava, then, we invoke again in the Nyamanakaya form as the one that is the Buddha teaching in the realm of lotus light, of Chamara. Look upon me from the lotus light of Chamara. Possibly we could capitalize lotus and light just because it's the name, really. Ngaya Pema. And particularly then, Padmasambhava's activity played out in Tibet. We would say Padmasambhava's life is extraordinary. And Trungpa Rinpoche would actually make a point of how the early part of Padmasambhava's life was very much on the realm of Sambhogakaya in some sense in India. The references we have to Padmasambhava's life in India are rather extraordinary. And so very often if we read Padmasambhava's life, sometimes difficult for modern persons to relate to. But really what's implicit in this is really how enlightenment interacts with the phenomenal world. So we could very much read Padmasambhava's life really as a way that enlightenment unobstructedly interacts with the world. And then particularly then we see Padmasambhava as being key really in the establishment of Buddhism in Tibet. So we have Padmasambhava both as a historical figure that established Buddhism in Tibet, and then also as the embodiment of the enlightened manifestation in this world. So we supplicate then, quickly protect with your compassion. Now, what's also implicit here is that when we invoke the various gurus of the lineage, we also do so with devotion. And so there's a lot of bhakti. There's a lot of yearning. There's a lot of invoking from the point of view of someone being lost and needing guidance. So here then, Jamguk Kongtrul writes, quickly protect with your compassion. The wretched Tibetan people is, of course, again, this is quite significant. The Tibetans at this point had, when this was written, the Tibetans already had a 1200-year remarkable history of both upholding and spreading the Buddhist teaching in Tibet, and yet they continually present themselves in this self-deprecatory way. They would always refer to India as the Holy Land and themselves as sort of primitive barbarians, red-faced primitive barbarians, the descendants of an ogre and a mountain spirit and a monkey, I think. So the Tibetans always have this sort of modesty, really, and when they refer to themselves. Anyway, this is then invoking the 3 kayas, the Dhammakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nyamanakaya. So this is really, you could say, the foundation of the lineage. And then we'll continue from there next time. So then we'll go to the text itself, Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching. I think Kindle has invented the bookmark. I might make use of that next time. Anyway, we'll get there. But this is a very beautiful liturgy, really. And somebody was just writing that they've included this in their daily practice. And this is, in fact, very often what practitioners, they would chant this first thing in the morning. This one is long, you could say. I mean, everything's relative, but it's relatively long. You have very short ones also. But the main thing really is to invoke the presence of the teacher and then to mingle with the teacher's presence. This is, of course, basic to the nature of what we're doing here. So here we are then in the text then. Trungpa Rinpoche is speaking to a 1974 audience of early Dharma students during the Naropa, what was it? Naropa Institute, early days, Naropa Institute. He says, in this book, we will examine Tantra theoretically. We are viewing the area that we might arrive at some point in the future. So it is somewhat hypothetical situation, but at the same time, we still could develop an experiential connection with it. The future of Buddhism depends on continuing to discover what the Buddha experienced and on sharing such experience with others. So there is a need to identify ourselves personally with tantric experience rather than regarding Tantra as one more spiritual trip. This, by the way, is quite auspicious day, and this is quite relevant for what we are studying here. Now you might say, well, the Buddha didn't teach Tantra, isn't that some later sort of invention, etc., etc.? We actually would say that the Buddha taught Tantra, perhaps not in the way that we might have seen Tantra develop later on, but certainly the Tantric teaching in terms of presenting enlightenment as already being fully manifest and encouraging students to take that as the path. We have various places where it explains how the Buddha taught Tantra, and we would say actually today, so happens auspiciously, that today on the full moon then of, I forget, what do we have, the 7th Tibetan month? Not sure, but anyway, Tukupema Wangyal, he sent a text the other day saying that the full moon, which we have today here in Australia, is actually on this particular month, is actually the first time the Buddha taught Tantra. So he turned the wheel of the Vajrayana and taught the Kala Chakra. So in this way, today is quite auspicious, referring to this. What Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about here is that the Vajrayana is something that should be approached with a solid foundation, both in terms of theory, understanding what we're doing, understanding its relationship to the Four Noble Truths, understanding its relationship to the teachings of Shunyata, understanding its relationship to compassion and the manifestations of enlightenment, and so on. So to have a theoretical understanding is essential to Vajrayana. And more than that, also to have experience and to be able to integrate then this experience in a greater way is then the scope of the Vajrayana. So this needs to be undertaken in terms of a very real project. It can't just be approached as a theoretical topic. And really, and of course, what still applies, we're talking almost 50 years later, not like some gimmick. To this day, the Western involvement with some of the ideas of Tantra are remarkably naive, and more than ever, it really applies what Trungpa Rinpoche speaks about here, is that it's important that we develop an experiential connection, but we are just examining Tantra theoretically. Of course, if you are already a Tantrika, excuse me, also if you're practicing the Nundra, of course, excuse me, but because at this point you are actually engaging fully according to, you could say, the way it should be approached. But at the same time also, this particular study we're undertaking here is not restricted in any way, and it really is intended for anyone at any place really to approach Tantra. So we will here examine Tantra very much from the point of view of more clarifying it. But that is also something that's important even for persons who have been practicing Tantra. So here we are on the auspicious occasion of the Buddha first time turning the wheel of the Vajrayana with giving the Kala Chakra teaching, which I think incidentally was given down in South India at one place. I think actually the place is referred to as Jepung in Tibetan, the heap of rice. I'm not exactly sure what the Indian name is, but as some of you will know, this is also the name of a great monastery near Lhasa. But this is where the Buddha supposedly taught them. Trungpa says, fundamentally, the Vajrayana comes out of a complete understanding and comprehension of both Hinayana and Mahayana Buddhism. The development of the three yanas, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, is one continuous process. In fact, the word Tantra or Gyu in Tibetan means continuity. There is a continuous thread running through the Buddhist path, which is our personal experience and our commitment to the Buddhist teaching. Usually we think of a thread as starting somewhere, but according to the Buddhist teaching, the thread has no beginning, and therefore there is continuity. In fact, such a thread does not even exist, but at the same time, it is continuous. So, of course, what we're saying about Buddha nature, which is what we're referring to here, sometimes we refer to this as Buddha nature, sometimes in terms of the path, we sometimes refer to it as bodhicitta in the absolute sense. But of course, the nature of this is that it's not subject to the conceptual constructs of time and space. So it falls outside of the extremes or the parameters of what we call existence and non-existence. It is not a scope of the conceptual mind that labels things as existing or not existing. And yet, as such then, not being bound by time and space, it exists as something that is unconditionally ever present. So this nature is then what we're approaching. But of course, this needs to be approached with a solid handle on it. And that's where we need the foundations really of the Hinayana and the Mahayana. Trungpa continues, at this point, we're not yet in a position to discuss what Tantra is. Since the continuity of Tantra is based on personal experience, we first need to understand the person who is having the experience. That is, we need to know who is studying Tantra. Who is it or what is it? So to begin with, we have to go back to the beginning and find out who is perceiving Tantra. That is, who is the Tantrika or Tantric practitioner. Of course, very often we approach objects of knowledge in terms of something that we just need to know. We need to extract the information, the data, and then we consider that we know something. This is very different. This is about us. This is about the one who is undertaking the study. And that's the place really that we are operating with. So this is about experience. This is about something felt, not about something that we can objectify as knowledge intellectually. Trungpa says, we could say that some people are tantric by nature. They are inspired in their lives. They realize that some reality is taking place in the true sense, and they feel that the experience of energy is relevant to them. They may feel threatened by energy, or they may feel a lack of energy, but they have a personal interest in the world, the visual world, the auditory world, the world of the senses altogether. They're interested in how things work and how things are perceived. That sense of enormous interest, that interest in perceptions, is tantric by nature. However, one problem with inspired future tantric practitioners is that they are often too fascinated by the world of the senses. There is something lacking. Although they are inspired, they may not have made a genuine connection to the world of the senses, which presents problems in understanding true Tantra. Still, they could be regarded as tantric fetuses or potential members of the tantric family. So So of course, what we're dealing with here is the individual that is interested in the world, and so very often the tantric people that Trungpa is describing here are those that are, let's say, very creative and very in love with the world, with the sensory experience, and yet the paradox is that despite being engaged in the world, this engagement tends to be a little bit with a tunnel vision. It's a fascination. And that's where then there lacks a perspective that actually takes the nature of reality into account. There's the perceptions, but there's not really understanding the context of the perceptions. So it's still a fairly narrow perspective. So even though there is a celebration of the world, there's still room for an even greater appreciation of the phenomenal world. When we begin to explore who the tantric practitioner actually is, our inquiry takes us further and further back, right to the basis of Buddhist practice, which is the Hinayana teaching. From this point of view, Hinayana is Tantra. One of the inspiring glimpses or experiences of tantric practitioners, one of the inspiring glimpses or experiences of the Hinayana practitioner is the absence of self, which is also the absence of God. When we realize that there is no individual being or personality who is perceiving external entities, the situation becomes open. We don't have to limit things by having conceptualized divine being, traditionally known as God. We're simply examining who we are. In examining who we are, we find, according to both the Hinayana and Tantric observation, that we're nobody, rather non-body. We might ask, how is that possible? I have a name, I have a body, I eat, I sleep, I lead my life, I wear clothes. But that is exactly the point. We misunderstand ourselves, our non-existent selves. Because we eat, we sleep, we live, and we have a name, we presume that something must be there. That common misunderstanding took place a long time ago, and it still takes place constantly, every single moment. Just because we have a name doesn't mean that we have a self. How do we realize that? Because if we do not use such reference points as our name or our clothing, if we stop saying, I eat, I sleep, I do such and such, then there is a big gap. So the foundation that we're talking about here then is beginning to actually connect with the world. And that's where we begin to have some understanding of there's a sacred quality that takes place, and that in some way takes place already at a Hinayana level. There's actually not a single, if we, from the Vajrayana perspective, there's not anything that's not Vajrayana. So from the Vajrayana perspective, and also we would sometimes say from like the perspective of the great perfection and so on, all the various aspects of the Buddhist path to awakening reflects this quality of enlightenment, of the already perfect disposition. And so there already is this this appreciation for, rather within the Tantra, there is the foundation, the initial foundation of discovering reality, relating to reality. And that's where we begin to awaken to this perspective that for something to be sacred, for us to exist and to have this experience that we have of being vivid, doesn't necessarily entail that there is something that we can solidify objectively. There's not necessarily a self in the sense that we ordinarily think of it. And also, without the self, then there's not a need for any kind of labeling or explanation, a Godhead. And there's not even also the level of the need for sort of the assertion that there's nothing. Very often in sort of postmodern discourse, we have the sense that, well, there's nothing there. We shouldn't kid ourselves. We shouldn't think that there really is anything. We're just meaningless bleeps in a meaningless universe. And that also is an entirely cerebral conception, entirely conjured up by an assumption of self, and basically stuck in what we call these extremes of asserting existence and non-existence. Reality exists beyond that. Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche would say that the problem with ordinary relative truth is that it appears to us as being so compelling, the sort of the appearance of the relative phenomenal world, that we actually solidify it and believe in it. But this is where, if we actually take a hard look, then we don't find anything that we can objectify or solidify. And this is very much the first step on the way, this discovery of no self. Trungpa Rinpoche continues, in a similar fashion, we often use reference points to show that we do not exist. We say that we do not exist because of something else. We might say, I do not exist because I'm penniless. No, we think in terms of there was something, then there's not something. There is something wrong with that logic because we still have a penny to be less of. However, this does not mean that we should try to destroy relative reference points. As an extreme example, during the 1960s, some people made hysterical attempts not to exist. By destroying references and credentials such as draft cards and birth certificates, they hoped to become invisible. By creating their draft cardlessness, but creating their draft cardlessness was still a statement of deliberate individuality, and it was still fighting over the questions of existence by struggling not to exist. Of course, now, 50 or 60 years later, we look back and we very often, the very persons who destroyed their draft cards and birth certificates, they probably have established a very sort of mainstream life. And in fact, that action itself very much reflects the umbilical cord as being something that was very significant. Destroying these sort of gestures, they very much, you could say, reflect a codependent relation to this society that they were trying to break out of. Of course, there's plenty of room for discussion around this in terms of contemporary history, but it's really more about what Trungpa Rinpoche is talking about here. It's really more when we say that there's nothing there, it's really based on initially having asserted an existence. So the saying that I don't have a penny obviously is something that stands in relation to having had a penny. This is the way that we would, one way of understanding what we call duality, that we would say once, if we have that, it's very much based on the existence of this. So that is where these are essentially what we call conceptual constructs. In the Buddhist tradition, discovering non-existence or egolessness has nothing to do with destroying relative reference points. Whether we try to maintain such reference points or destroy them, we still have the problem. The Buddhist approach is not to use any reference points at all, none whatsoever. Then we're not finding out whether we exist or not, but we're simply looking at ourselves directly, without any reference point, without even looking, we could say. That may be very demanding, but let it be so. Let us get to the heart of the matter. Okay, I should say there's some, actually what in effect you're being exposed to here is some little bit of logic, middle way logic, the kind you find taught by Nagarjuna Chandrakirti. But it is, and of course what's implicit in the Prajnaparamita teachings and in any teaching really across the board of Buddhism everywhere, is that things don't exist the way they appear. And that's where we need to begin to extract ourselves from some of the assumptions that we have with regards to what we think is a given, and such a thing as asserting reality to phenomena then is also what ends up making us believe in the non-existence of things. So if we assert that one thing exists, then we implicitly are preparing for its non-existence. These are, if we investigate, assumptions that are actually groundless. We cannot find anything, if we investigate, that has any true objective existence. And that's where then the whole, what we could call the dichotomy of this and that, and the way that we operate in terms of things existing and not existing, is really what keeps this duality, this delusional misunderstanding of reality going. So we have to understand what we're looking at here is really understanding the nature of reality, which we fail to see properly unless we actually look. Of course, Trungpa is saying we could go beyond any reference point, and we could also go beyond even looking, because the subject also doesn't possess an existence, and the object doesn't possess an existence. But what we could do to arrive at that, you could say, non-looking or non-seeing or whatever, is certainly dismantle the assumptions around the reference points that we operate with. So this could sound daunting in terms of just logic, but at the same time, it's worth looking into. And it's really the same assumption that it's really the same logic that goes into when we, for example, are judgmental about something or someone. We very often find that if we look at what we were judging, if we've jumped to a conclusion about something, we can see how it's flawed because we were way too simplistic in our assumption, you know. We might meet a new person and think they're just absolutely wonderful or absolutely despicable, whatever. And that initial assumption, the more we know the person, falls away. And that's where the reference points that we very often operate from are based on some quite primitive labeling that, if we investigate, actually don't hold up. Okay, so we'll go a little bit more longer, a little bit further. When we attempt to see ourselves without reference points, we may find ourselves in a situation of not knowing what to do. We may feel completely lost, and we may think that what we're trying to do is very strange indeed. I can't even begin. How can I do anything? Then we might have an inkling of beginning at the beginning. Having to relate with the bewilderment of not knowing how to deal with ourselves without using reference points is getting closer to the truth. At the same time, we have not found the root of reality, if there is one at all. This humble that the humble recognition that the assumptions and the credentials and the place that we ordinarily operate from might not apply, might make us feel lost. It might have a sense that, well, the ordinary way I do things, and I am like this and that, that's how I do stuff. That's me. Without that, we might actually have some confusion, but that's actually a good place to be. That's already humbling ourselves, and it's also beginning to open ourselves up to reality. So that's where this is not an undesirable place to be. And it is, like Trungpa says, this is where we begin to have an inkling of beginning at the beginning. So that's completely all right. So, of course, there's not arrived at tremendous insight, certainty, and clarity, but even to just have that openness, that's already beginning to have some idea of what really we mean with the nature of wisdom and so forth. It's not about knowing something, it's about us beginning to feel and being ready to be open in a greater way. We cannot find the beginning of the tantric thread unless we come to the conclusion that we do not exist. We might try to work out our non-existence logically. However, the conclusion that we do not exist has to be experiential, and it also has to be beyond our stupidity and confusion. Our confusion at this point is not knowing how to begin. From that, we can start to feel the beginninglessness of the thread and its endlessness as well. So we're getting somewhere, but we might still feel rather stupid, like jellyfish or robots. There is no sense of discovery at all, and the whole thing seems rather flat. The thing is, we very often have so much information, so much attitude, that it's difficult for anything to penetrate. So it's important for us to begin at a place where we're actually willing to just hear. And so our sort of not volunteering our particular interesting, tremendously educated point of view or informing our actions with our particular unique style might leave us feeling a little bit sort of limp and sort of inactive. And so the point really is not about us sort of being left as sort of phlegmatic, stupid individuals, but it's more that we're actually beginning to open up, being willing to actually feel. And so that's where we need to have this starting point of discovering that some of our reference points, they don't apply. What we're here referring to as non-existence. Our assumptions don't quite apply. According to the Tantric tradition, the only way to find our way out of that confusion, or our way in, is by having a sense of humor about our predicament. We're trying to find ourselves, but we're not able to do so. And we feel enormously flat and heavy in that way. Something is being a nuisance, but we cannot put our finger on exactly what it is. Nevertheless, something, somewhere, is being a nuisance. Or is it? If we view this with humor, we begin to find that even the flatness, the lack of inspiration, the solidity and the confusion are dancing constantly. We need to develop a sense of excitement and dance rather than just trying to feel better. When we begin to dance with our humor, our apparent stupidity becomes somewhat uplifted. However, we do not know how for sure whether we are just looking at ourselves humorously while our stupidity grows heavy all the time, or whether we might actually be able to cure ourselves. There is still something that is uncertain, completely confused, and very ambiguous. Of course, here we need to have some trust in the whole process, and this is also where we need to have some understanding of the nature of the Buddhist path and so forth, so that we're not actually being entire, that we might be willing to be fools or stupid or flat, as Trungpa is describing here, but it has to come from a place of being willing to undergo this process. So this, of course, is premised on having some initial trust in the nature. We might, we stay at it, we maybe have to go to the hospital and all our clothes are taken from us, and maybe we're giving some hospital gown and we look silly in the hospital gown, and things aren't quite familiar. So we need to have that kind of initial trust in the institution. But with that, then we could very well just see our own helplessness as being somewhat comical. So that's where we shouldn't necessarily, even though we haven't exactly found our thread, found our bearings and so on, then we can actually appreciate the quality of the process. At that point, let's see, at that point, we finally could start to relate with the ambiguity. In the Tantric tradition, discovering that ambiguity is discovering the seed syllable. Ambiguity is called a seed syllable because it becomes a starting point rather than the source of problems. When we accept uncertainty as the working base, then we begin to discover that we do not exist. We can experience and appreciate the ambiguity as the source of confusion as well as the source of humor. The discovery of non-existence comes from experiencing both the energy of humor and the heavy thingness of form, of confusion. But form or thingness does not prove the existence of energy, and the energy does not prove the existence of form. So there is no confirmation, just ambiguity. Therefore, we find ourselves at a loss. However, at this point, that feeling of being lost has the quality of freedom rather than the quality of confusion. So here, the very core of our existence really is this communicative nature. So we would say seed syllable is really sometimes we refer to the seed syllable as really the origin of manifestation. So from the point of view of us engaging in the tantric journey, it's very much about us being willing to just go down to the very source of our existence. And that's where we could then experience this source of our existence in terms of our actual sense of identity. And from that point of view, then also the intelligence that comes with our identity, as well as then the wisdom of that, the sense of humor. So that kind of experience of having some, if not identity, then some reference point. This is seen as the seed symbol, the place from where we begin to manifest in the world. This actually has a lot of significance in terms of also tantric sadhana, as some of you who are sadhakas will know. And in general, we would say that the tantric approach to the entire realm of manifestation starts off with this very place of this cognitive quality of just the seed syllable. So that kind of place has nothing to do really with the ordinary assertions about existence and non-existence and so forth. But this is a very real place that we then begin to journey outward from. So we'll then do questions at this point. Okay, wow. Could you possibly recommend a documentary that gives a good background to the different Tibetan lineages? You know, the first thing that comes to mind really are books. There's some wonderful books out there that gives us some idea of the lineages. There's some individual life stories that are really worth reading. Of course, one that really had a big impact, both in Tibet and also outside of Tibet, is the life of Milarepa. But in terms of lineages, there are quite a few works. I'm a little bit more familiar with the Nyingma side of things. There's a book called Masters of Miracles and Meditation by Tuku Tundrup. There's one called The Garland of Rare Gems by Nyeshu Ken Rinpoche. Then you have more sort of classic works which talk about the early days of Indian and Tibetan Buddhism, called the Blue Annals, translated by somebody called George Roerich, which is a old translation, so I'm not entirely sure. It's a little bit academic in some sense, but it's very interesting. You have you actually do have a work by Tuku Tundrup, which sums it all up. That's almost the most accessible one. It's a small work called Buddhist Civilization in Tibet. That probably is the one that gives the best overview of all the various traditions. I'll think of some more, or rather keep asking me. Okay. Buddhist Civilization in Tibet, that's a good work, a short book to begin with. But I can't think of any documentaries. There probably is. Maybe somebody has a documentary they know of. They can type them in. That'd be great. Regarding Nundro as a must-do before receiving further Vajrayana teachings and practices, is it because we have a distorted, impure, conditioned perception that we need to engage in the Nundro practice? Since in the case of not doing so, we would definitely miss the point of the more raw Vajrayana teachings, as they aim to see reality as it actually is and not how we perceive through our lenses. Is this then a safe approach to receiving more direct teaching of Vajrayana? All of that, what you're saying there, is true. And what we generally would say is that, yes, we miss the point. That's what you're implying. That's true. And also, for us to get the point, then certain conditions need to be in place. Just in terms of our relative experience, there's a place of coming clean from our confusion. There's a place of actually creating a sense of richness and wealth that comes from Nundro practice as well. There's particularly two aspects that we achieve in Nundro practice. In addition, you could say, to the foundation, which is taking refuge, the scope, which is the vastness of the Mahayana vision. But then also we have what's called purification and accumulation. Purification is just cleaning up our act, and accumulation is developing a sense of wealth and being wealthy through giving a lot. So these are foundations that are really essential to approaching, then you'd say, the encounter with the wisdom that that is the foundation of Vajrayana, to actually be able to, as you're implying, to to go beyond our ordinary lenses and discover something greater, what we call co-emergent wisdom. This is where we need then these foundations, and particularly then the blessing of the teacher and the conditions of accumulation and purification. Someone says, this prayer has really helped me. I read this every day, very powerful. That's wonderful. Then someone asks, what lineage are we invoking? Actually, with the calling, this is also really important. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. With the calling, the crying to the gurus from afar, we're actually invoking all the lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, what we call the 8 lineages of the practice lineages, and also the general 4 lineages. So you're covered with that one. Can you speak upon Padmasambhava's many takings of human lives? Well, that's yeah, that is kind of, well, gosh. Well, you know, when we talk about taking life in the tantric sense, we should understand that that is taking the life of delusion. So sometimes in the reference point, in the narratives that we have, then there's references to both killing and sex, and of course we might want to sort of investigate that from a point of view of having some historical reality, but really what the Vajrayana point is more the what we call the liberating of ego, of the freeing of ego, or that's then referred to in tantric speak as the killing of ego. Then again, there is an incident in the early life of Padmasambhava of killing a minister's son, but that's also, and that of course resulted in Padmasambhava's expulsion from the kingdom, and then you could say precipitating him into the life of a wandering mendicant, a yogi, and so forth. But of course, that as we can read about, really comes in terms of particular aspects, both in terms of karma and also in terms of Padmasambhava's interacting with the world. But I would say, for sort of to sort of get the more in-depth story, I would refer to Trungpa Rinpoche's Crazy Wisdom, really, to sort of you know, get a more interesting perspective on this, honestly. Bookmark is magic, yes. It sounds more like internalized racism than just being humble. Did the Indians elevate themselves above the Tibetans? Is that why? I'm not exactly sure what we're talking about here. The point is that the Tibetans have this humility, which I think very often in the modern world, we're very often, you know, about promoting, you know, I come from Denmark, which is a very small country. Very often the Danes, they would have sort of a thing like, well, we're special because we're Danish, you know, and that's where there's something quite beautiful about humility, and that's where the Tibetans really, you could say, they have a beautiful culture of humility in terms of their role in Buddhism, and despite actually the Tibetans having remarkable history. So that's what I mean, which is quite a good example really for us in the modern world, who very often would like to say, well, now, you know, we're modern Buddhists or whatever, you know, rather than actually sustaining this openness that is about hearing, you know, like we start off, actually what Trungpa Rinpoche was just talking about, the willingness to actually be flat, to be open, to be willing to say, I actually don't know, and you know, the ordinary ground from which I operate doesn't really apply. That's where we could begin to hear things. And then someone says, I was at the first Kala Chakra in the US in 1981 by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Wonderful. Amarvati. Okay. Can you give an example of someone who is too fascinated by the world of the senses and one who is not interested at all? Well, it happens when we're basically just caught up in the object, and we lose perspective. So we could be fascinated with things that we hate, and we get consumed by hatred, or we could be fascinated by things that we're so wanting that we lose track of everything else. So that's where the sage and the proposition that we're making here is to actually begin to see the context, see wider. Yeah, and we have a lot of examples of people who are too fascinated by the world, and this leads to a lot of, you could say, accidents. So the genuine connection to the world of the senses then is the path of Tantra, where experience is not clouded by conceptual constructs, but rather is open and spacious. I think so. Yes, that's what we're heading towards, really. But it's also understanding that the entire world of the senses is very much tied up with us. So there's very much an increased sensitivity to the way that we interact with the world and perceive the world. Does Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche mean literally to stop referring to ourselves in everyday speech? No. This is about understanding reality. It's not necessarily about behavior. So it's not as if we should stop particular practices that we're doing, but it's more actually that we begin to open up to what is being said about our reality. In light of the 3 kayas, the 5 perfections, etc., yeah, can we consider karmic cause and effect as our relative experience as Sambhogakaya? Yes, we can. That is, of course, what we're doing within the Vajrayana. We are seeing the 3 kayas and the 5 perfections as spontaneously, you could say, present as the foundation, really, of what appears as our relative experiences. So it's approaching that and becoming sensitized to that, which is then the sort of the magic of the tantric journey. That is where we're relating to the Sambhogakaya. But of course, that goes through the experience of the Dharmakaya. If so, then is Sambhogakaya a bridge between current karmic appearance, Niyamanakaya, skillfully working, and Dharmakaya? And then from the other direction, Dharmakaya, awareness of emptiness, clarity, compassion, radiating Niyamanakaya, enlightened manifestation. Transcending existence, yet fullness of presence. Yes, we could say that. We could say in some way that the Sambhogakaya is really at this place of manifestation. So it's, when we talk about kayas in general, we're talking about the perspective. Things aren't neither samsaric or nirvanic in and of themselves. It's about, are we privy to it? So when we're talking Sambhogakaya, this is from the point of view of the unconfused subjectivity, the unconfused practitioner. Then these things apply. So first, to actually speak about Sambhogakaya is actually premised on there actually having been some purification and experience. But then, yes, then with the experience of the Dharmakaya, then both the Sambhogakaya and Niyamanakaya arise from that. If I understand, Chögyam Trungpa is stating we should not destroy relative reference points, but as Buddhists simply not use them. Well, he's right. We're not destroying relative reference points, but it's also that it's not so much that we're not using them because we need to. Hey, we need to pay taxes, right? We need to go from A to B. We need to eat. So it's not as if we're just, it's not as if, okay, I'm not going to destroy my fridge, but I'm not going to touch it. We're going to have to open the fridge. We're going to continue paying taxes. We're going to have to live our lives as we ordinarily do. But we might not attribute the solidity to these reference points that we very often are entangled with. While I see how the nature of things is seen as empty, it's tricky to see how they are not used. Perhaps using while not seeing through. It's like Tongsa Jamyangkhen's Rinpoche's story of a mother telling her child, or the fairy tales. Yes, I mean, we talk about relative truth as being deceptive. So we could talk about it as being fair. What is it? Tongsa Khen's Rinpoche talks about Cinderella truth, right? So of course, our relative, that we need to eat 3 meals a day, pay taxes, that we are born and are going to die. That's a Cinderella, the Cinderella level, So, but at the same time, it's pretty real. So we need to operate within this. Of course, what the journey is continually is about is being less deceived by these appearances. Are Apadmasambhava and Samantabhadra the same being? Well, we would say that Samantabhadra is the ground, and we could say Padmasambhava is the manifestation within that ground. But of course, we're talking about an unconfused manifestation. So in some way, we could say Padmasambhava's nature is Samantabhadra. Sometimes we differentiate a little bit depending on whether we're talking about the Dhammakaya or the Nyamanakaya. But of course, we would talk about the three kayas, Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nyamanakaya, as being inseparable. So in this way, we could say that some Padmasambhava and Samantabhadra are the same, but we also would say Padmasambhava is more the embodiment of interacting with the phenomenal world. These teachings are superbly piercing, so grateful. And also, I would say, I must make this disclaimer, of course, you're present in my reading of it. What you're getting now is somebody with my background who is reading Trungpa Rinpoche's text. So it might, if you yourself are a student of Chögyam Trungpa, or you're reading this text on your own, you might have other inspirations. Of course, what you're just getting here is a particular perspective that I'm coming with. But in and of itself, these works of Chögyam Trungpa very much, it's also Khyentse Rinpoche once said the works of Chögyam Trungpa, they're like tantras, you know, they're so sublime and perfect, really. Amaravati, Andhra Pradesh, Dalai Lama gave Kala Chakra there in 2006. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, the Dalai Lama, this Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, is unique in having given the Kala Chakra so many different times. He also gave it in Spiti back in the, I don't remember, 80s or 90s. But and Bodh Gaya several times, right? Can you give an example of a practitioner experiencing ambiguity? I didn't understand those paragraphs. I'm not sure what you're referring to there. Actually, I would say this thing of asking me to give examples requires, that's a difficult one, you know, when we have question and answer sessions, because I'd have to think a little bit about some of these things, you know, to come up with an example. Of course, it's definitely a valid request, but I have to say, somebody once told me I have a Mercury in Capricorn, so I'm a little bit slow in the uptake. But then again, I'll do my best if I can, but I'm sure what you're referring to here. Can you talk a bit about relating? Can you talk a bit about relating to this ambiguity a bit more? It's like trying to feel a bit more flavor of its quality. What is the ambiguity? Hold on. Hold on. There was something ambiguity here at the end here. So the form of things does not prove the existence of energy, and energy does not prove the existence of form. So there's no confirmation, just ambiguity. Okay. Well, really, we're talking about this groundlessness. And so where we very often need to have information about, let's say we walk into a situation, we arrive in a social context, we arrive at a dinner with people we don't know. So we very often would like to have, you know, credentials. We would like to actually know what we're supposed to do. And actually it's left up to us. We're left ambiguous. It's our role there is not clear. Our actions are not clear. And that we might feel that we are floundering at that point. But in a way, it's a beautiful opportunity for us to actually just lean into and be comfortable with what is there without necessarily having credentials or a particular role. So that's how I'm understanding that. I hope that makes sense. Jakob, are we able to access this teaching again at another time? You've packed a lot into it and excellent explanations, but I'd like to listen. Yeah, as all of you who have received the email, you also have the link to the recordings. So the recordings will be up there. Sometimes it takes me a day or so to get them up there, but usually They'll be there within 24 hours or so. Sometimes quickly, sometimes takes a little bit more time. Then a question. So our confusion is really just inviting us to see the truth of ambiguity and dance with it rather than trying to manipulate it. Yes, yes, that is exactly what is meant. Thank you very much. I can sort of relate to having no reference point, but dwell in a space of feeling like a lost child. I then find it hard to come out from this place. It feels made up, fabricated. Can you say a bit more about the seed syllable and how that helps? Well, the seed syllable really doesn't need a script. So it's more just the awakened quality that is willing to then engage. So in that sense, we don't really need to be to move. We are actually invited. So that's where the seed syllable, it comes from a place of openness, but also a place of manifestation and interaction. There's not really a sense of barrier between self and other, or self and the phenomenal world. And from that point of view, then the seed syllable is there and just manifesting spontaneously according to the particular situation. So that's where then the mandala originates, really as a manifestation of this seed syllable manifesting in the phenomenal world. Arnaud Desjardins, the message of the Tibetan. 2, Tantrism. Yes, Arnaud, he gives speaks a bit about lineage, if that's what you're talking about. Yes, actually, it's true. That's a good doco for the lineages of, Arnaud Desjardins did some remarkable docos in the late 1960s called The Message of the Tibetans. And you have there some extraordinary footage and also a reasonably informed introduction to the Buddhism of Tibet. Not entirely accurate at the time, though. Why Buddha Amitabha is the Dharmakaya? Something to do with the Padma family for this invoking? Yes. So we would say, of course, the Dharmakaya in essence is beyond any substance, but then again, Dharmakaya has its qualities of wisdom. And so there we talk about the 5 families, and we talk about the Buddha Amitabha as the Dharmakaya of the Padma family. Okay. So someone's saying the sound is cutting up. Then somebody's saying, I think here ambiguity means uncertainty. Okay. Can the ambiguity paragraph be returned to next week? I am not the only one who gets lost, it seems. Okay. Really excellent presentation, Jakob. So helpful. Many thanks. Good. Thank you. All right. I think we're coming towards the end. Amaravati is also the place that Buddha gave Kalachakra for the first time. As you mentioned, thank you very much. Good. So that's in Andhra Pradesh. Okay. Thank you. Drepung in Tibetan. Okay. The dinner party guest was a great example. Okay. Thank you for going overtime. All right. Yes, we have gone a bit overtime. Okay. All right. I think we'll conclude. Thank you for today. Thank you, all of you. And I'll see you next week. Thank you. Through this virtue, may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. In the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you.